So I want to take you and our viewers a little back in time to about 1501 when the transatlantic slave trade first began. And
Awesome.
when our ancestors were boarded onto those ships, they weren't black, they weren't Christian. Most of them didn't even know who Jesus Christ was.
Speak on it.
They were Igbo, Ashanti, Fulani, Hausa, Akan, many, many more.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, but what united them in the hulls of those ships and what united them on those slaveholding plantations was their belief in the faithfulness of their gods, Olumare,
Mm-hmm.
Oshun,
Yep.
Chineke,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Allah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They were united in their faith and they were united in their struggle for survival, justice, and freedom, right? So from the very beginning, people of African descent who ultimately became Black people, colored Negroes, African American, praise and protest has always gone hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we praise and protest in many different ways, but ultimately we knew that our individual survival was tied to the collective survival of the whole. I root what I'm doing today with my family in that history.
Mm.
Right? And most of
Mm.
our people didn't become Christian until the Second Great Awakening in the late 1700s,
Yep.
when listen participating in these ecstatic revivals, charismatic speakers, it reminded them of what they had experienced on the other side of the Atlantic.
Mm.
And in the message of Jesus Christ, they saw a brother who was not only speaking out against the master class of his time on
Mm-hmm.
behalf of marginalized people, people who had their backs against the wall, and they saw a messenger that spoke to their own individual conditions. Some would argue that the first freedom struggle for people of African descent in America was the movement towards denominational independence,
Mm.
independent Black churches, which is why I think that Black churches are frequently targeted by white supremacists for burnings
Mm.
and attacks because it represents an independence,
Mm.
praise, and protest from white supremacy and institutionalized racism. So, but you know, we've always had linguistic, cultural, social, political, religious diversity within the African American community
Mm-hmm.
among people of African descent. So we've had to work that out,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Um, So that's the origins. That's the ancestral and spiritual origins of, my activism, my, you know, quest for social justice. Now, I grew up in Oakland and Berkeley, California,
Okay.
the birth of the free speech movement,
Mm-hmm.
the home of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, also the home of the Hells Angels, right? So we got a rebel culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
it's in the atmosphere. Um, but fundamentally, what I learned from what I saw and what I studied is that nothing has changed in this country without protest. And unfortunately, and I'm not advocating violence, and I know that some people want to conflate
Right.
protesting
Right.
with violent action. And I
Right.
would argue that if you look at the history of this country, I mean, it's you know, more often than not, nothing has changed without the threat of violence or actual violence. But more often than not, it was the threat of violence or actual violence perpetrated by people in power against people without power. It wasn't my fraternity brother and Masonic brother, John Lewis, who
Mm-hmm.
walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with bricks and billy clubs attacking Alabama State Troopers. It was Alabama State Troopers with bricks and billy clubs that were attacking John Lewis and the other freedom marchers. Change in this country often, unfortunately, happens when those people whose backs are against the wall, who are afraid to go out for a jog, who are afraid to move to a new town for a new job in Prairie View,
Mm.
Texas,
Mhm.
who may be knowingly or unknowingly passing a counterfeit bill.
Mm.
These things become death sentences. So it's these people who fear going out to get a bottle of Arizona iced tea and a pack of Skittles, that this might mean the end to my life or my son's life or
Yep.
the life of my neighbor. And they're willing to say, no, no more. I ain't gonna, I'm not gonna shoot. I'm not gonna loot, but you ain't gonna do what you've always done. That's when
Mhm.
change happens.